My spoiled sister wants to exchange her old car for my expensive new sports car because she was sick, but all her lies were exposed, and her reputation was totaled. My sister Zoe always got whatever she wanted by making herself the victim. When I bought my new sports car after working 3 jobs for 5 years, she immediately decided it should be hers. "You don't need something that fancy," she told me. "My car is perfectly fine for someone like you. We should switch. It makes more sense." Her car was a 15-year-old sedan with 200,000 miles that she'd destroyed with her terrible driving. The bumpers were held on with duct tape. The engine made sounds like a dying animal. The interior smelled like the 40 different fast food restaurants she'd eaten in without ever cleaning. My car was a brand new model I'd dreamed about since high school. I'd saved every penny, worked overtime until I was sick, skipped vacations for 5 years to afford it. The day I drove it home was the proudest moment of my life. Zoe saw it and immediately started her campaign. First, she told our parents I was being materialistic and shallow. "Some people care more about showing off than family," she said at dinner while I sat right there. "I just think sharing resources makes sense. My car works perfectly fine for basic transportation." Mom agreed with her because Mom always agreed with Zoe. "Your sister has a point. That car is too much for you anyway. Why do you need something so expensive?" Dad stayed quiet like always. Zoe had them trained to give her whatever she wanted to avoid her meltdowns. Zoe started parking her disaster of a car behind mine, so I couldn't leave without asking her to move. "Oh, I didn't realize you needed to go out," she'd say, then take 20 minutes finding her keys. She'd move it just enough that I had to do a 17-point turn to get out while she watched and laughed. She told everyone in our family that I'd promised to share the car, but was now being selfish. "We had an agreement," she'd lie to aunts and uncles. "But now they're going back on their word because they like the attention the car brings." She had cousins calling me, asking why I was being so mean to Zoe. She started leaving notes on my car about how wasteful it was, how the insurance money could feed hungry children, how the gas mileage was destroying the planet. But she still wanted it for herself somehow. The logic never made sense, but Zoe didn't care about logic. She cared about getting what she wanted. Then she switched tactics. She started telling people she had medical issues that required a reliable car. "My old car keeps breaking down when I'm driving to doctor appointments," she'd cry to anyone who'd listen. "But my sibling won't help me even though I'm sick." She wasn't sick. She'd never been sick. But suddenly, everyone was pressuring me to give her my car for her health. She posted on social media about how scared she was driving her unsafe car. Posted pictures of the duct-taped bumpers with captions about hoping she'd make it home alive. Tagged me in every post. "Some people have family who care. I'm not that lucky," she'd write. People who didn't know the truth started attacking me online for letting my sick sister drive a dangerous car. The real escalation came when she called my insurance company pretending to be me and tried to add herself as a driver. They called me to confirm, and I found out she'd also tried to get a duplicate key from the dealership using a fake ID she'd made with my information. She'd been one signature away from literally stealing my car legally. I confronted her, and she cried to Mom that I was accusing her of crimes she didn't commit. "I was just trying to help with the insurance costs," she sobbed. "I thought if I was on the policy, I could pay half." She'd never paid for anything in her life. Mom believed her and demanded I apologize. I refused and installed security cameras pointing at my parking spot. Good thing, too, because 3 nights later, I caught Zoe on video putting sugar in my gas tank. She was trying to destroy my car so I'd have to use hers. When I showed Mom the footage, she said she was probably just confused. Maybe she thought it was her car. They looked nothing alike. One was a shiny red sports car. The other was a brown pile of rust. The breaking point came at Thanksgiving. Zoe announced to the entire extended family that she'd been diagnosed with a rare condition that required special transportation. She pulled out fake medical documents she'd created, saying she needed a car with specific safety features that only my car had. "I might die without proper transportation," she said through fake tears. "But family means nothing to some people." She looked directly at me. Everyone turned to stare at me with disgust. How could I let my sick sister die over a car? That's when my cousin Nathan, who worked at the hospital Zoe claimed to go to, spoke up. "That's weird, Zoe. Our system has no record of you being a patient, and this doctor you're supposedly seeing retired 3 years ago." The room went silent. Nobody moved. The turkey got cold on the table while everyone stared at Zoe with her fake papers still in her hands. Her face went white like all the blood drained out. She'd been crying those fake tears a second ago, but now she just looked scared. 30 people watching her fall apart. I could see her brain working, trying to find a way out. But there wasn't one. Nathan had just blown up her whole story in front of everyone. Nathan pulled out his phone and started scrolling. He turned it so the people closest to him could see the screen. He explained that he'd searched the hospital system right there at the table while Zoe was doing her speech about dying. The doctor she named, Dr. Richardson, retired in 2019. The system had zero record of Zoe ever being a patient, and the condition she claimed to have, the one that supposedly required my car's special safety features, that wasn't even real. He'd looked it up. The symptoms she described didn't match any actual medical condition. The safety features she said she needed, those weren't things that helped with any real illness. She'd made up everything. Zoe's hands shook. She put the papers down on the table and tried to laugh like this was all some big misunderstanding. She said Nathan must be looking at the wrong hospital system. Maybe her records were in a different database. Maybe there was a computer error. Her voice cracked when she talked. She couldn't look at anyone. My Uncle Christian reached across the table and picked up the medical documents she'd brought. He held them up to the light. Then he pointed at the hospital logo at the top of the page. He worked in graphic design. He said that logo came from a template website. He'd used that exact same template for a client last year. It wasn't the real hospital letterhead. The real hospital had a different logo with different colors. These papers were fake. Valerie finally spoke up. She said maybe there'd been some kind of mix-up with the records. Maybe Zoe went to a different location or saw a different doctor and got confused about the names. But her voice sounded weak. She didn't sound like she believed what she was saying. She always jumped to defend Zoe, always had some excuse ready, but this time she couldn't even convince herself. Albert sat there with his fork still in his hand, halfway to his mouth like he'd frozen mid-bite. He stared at Zoe like he'd never seen her before, like she was a stranger sitting at his table. I took a deep breath. My hands were shaking too, but not from fear. From anger. From years of watching Zoe lie and manipulate and get away with everything. I pulled out my phone. I'd been holding on to something, waiting for the right moment. This was it. I told everyone that the fake medical documents weren't even the worst part. This wasn't just about Zoe lying to get my car. This was about what she did when lying didn't work. I opened the video file on my phone. I'd watched it maybe 50 times since it happened 3 nights ago. The security camera footage was crystal clear. I turned up the volume and pressed play. Then I passed my phone to the person sitting next to me. On the screen, you could see my parking spot lit up by the streetlight. The timestamp said 11:04 p.m. Then Zoe walked into frame. She looked around like she was checking if anyone was watching. She was wearing dark clothes and had her hair pulled back. She walked right up to my car. She had something in her hand, a container. She opened my gas tank and poured whatever was in that container inside. The whole thing took maybe 30 seconds. Then she closed the gas tank, looked around one more time, and walked away. The person next to me gasped when they saw it. They passed the phone to the next person, then the next. People's faces changed as they watched. Shock, disgust, disbelief. My Aunt Peyton watched it and covered her mouth with her hand. She looked like she might throw up. Zoe stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. Her water glass tipped over and spilled across the table. Water ran everywhere, but nobody moved to clean it up. She started crying again. Real tears this time, not the fake ones from before. She said I'd been spying on her, violating her privacy, recording her without permission. She turned to Valerie and said I was trying to make her look bad on purpose, that I'd set her up somehow, that this whole thing was me being cruel to her. But even Valerie looked uncertain now. She didn't jump in to defend Zoe. She just sat there looking between Zoe and the phone that was still making its way around the table. I kept my voice calm. I explained that I installed the cameras to protect my property. I explained that 3 weeks ago, Zoe called my insurance company pretending to be me. She tried to add herself as a driver on my policy. The insurance company called me to confirm, and that's when I found out. I explained that she also went to the dealership where I bought my car. She tried to get a duplicate key made. She had a fake ID with my information on it. She was one signature away from literally being able to steal my car legally. That's when I put up the cameras. Nathan spoke up and backed me up. He said his cousin worked at that dealership. She'd told him about someone trying to get keys with a suspicious ID. He'd heard about it weeks ago, but didn't know it was Zoe until now. Albert put his fork down. His hands were shaking. His voice came out quiet but hard. He asked Zoe directly if she really put sugar in my gas tank. He said her name. He looked right at her. He wanted an answer. Zoe stood there with tears running down her face. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She just stood there crying. And everyone watching knew what that meant. Silence was the same as a confession. Peyton turned to me. She said she was sorry. She said she had no idea things were this serious. She said she was sorry for calling me 2 weeks ago and pressuring me about sharing the car with my sick sister. She'd believed Zoe's lies like everyone else. Other relatives started talking too. Quiet apologies, embarrassed voices, people looking down at their plates. They'd all sent me messages, made phone calls, left comments on social media, all of them telling me I was selfish, telling me I should help my sister, telling me family was more important than a car. Now they knew the truth. Zoe grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. Her knuckles went white. She opened her mouth and closed it again. Then she started crying harder. Real tears this time, not the fake ones she used to get what she wanted. She looked around at everyone staring at her. Her voice came out shaky and desperate. She said she'd been under so much stress lately. She said she hadn't been thinking clearly. She said her health problems had her so worried that she made bad choices. She looked at me with tears running down her face. She said she was sorry. She said she never meant for things to go this far. Nathan set his phone down on the table. His voice stayed calm and even. He said stress doesn't make you fake medical documents. He said stress doesn't make you commit fraud with someone's identity. He said those were calculated choices that took planning and effort. He said you don't accidentally create fake hospital paperwork. You don't accidentally try to steal someone's car keys with a fake ID. You don't accidentally pour sugar in someone's gas tank at 11 at night. Those were deliberate actions that Zoe chose to do. The table went quiet again. Zoe's crying got louder, but nobody moved to comfort her. Valerie finally spoke up. Her voice sounded tired and strained. She said maybe we should discuss this privately as a family. She looked around at all the relatives watching. She said we didn't need to air everything out in front of everyone. She suggested we could talk about this calmly tomorrow when emotions weren't so high. I shook my head. I said Zoe made this public when she lied to everyone here about being sick. I said she dragged the whole family into her lies. I said they all deserved to know the truth about what had been happening for the past 3 months. I said I wasn't going to pretend everything was fine to protect Zoe from the consequences of her own actions. Valerie's face got red. She started to say something but stopped. My Uncle Christian stood up. His chair scraped against the floor. He looked directly at Zoe. His voice came out hard and angry. He said what she did was unacceptable. He said it might actually be criminal. He said he was ashamed that he believed her lies without questioning them. He said he called me 2 weeks ago and lectured me about helping my sick sister. He said he felt like an idiot for not seeing through her story. He said he owed me a serious apology for pressuring me based on complete lies. Other relatives started nodding. A few people looked down at their plates. The mood in the room shifted from shock to anger. People were mad at Zoe now instead of me. Zoe must have felt it because she suddenly stopped crying. Her face changed. The victim act dropped away completely. She stood up straight. Her voice got loud and sharp. She yelled that I'd always been selfish. She said everyone babies me for working hard when plenty of people work hard without acting superior about it. She said I loved rubbing my success in her face. She said I bought that stupid car just to show off and make her feel bad. She said I could have helped her but chose not to because I'm a terrible person. Albert's fork clattered onto his plate. Everyone turned to look at him. He stared at Zoe with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. His voice came out harder than I'd ever heard it. He told Zoe to sit down and be quiet. He said she'd made things worse with every word out of her mouth. He said she needed to stop talking immediately. Zoe's mouth fell open. She looked at Albert like he'd slapped her. She started to say something, but he held up his hand. He told her he meant it. He said not another word. Zoe sat down hard in her chair. Her face was bright red. Tears started again, but this time they looked like angry tears instead of sad ones. The dinner was over. Nobody said it out loud, but everyone knew. People started standing up and making awkward excuses. Someone said they had a long drive home. Someone else said they needed to get the kids to bed early. Aunt Peyton started gathering her dishes even though half the food was still on the table. People moved around collecting coats and containers. The normal Thanksgiving goodbye routine, but faster and more uncomfortable. Several relatives pulled me aside as they were leaving. They apologized again in quiet voices. They said they should have questioned Zoe's story more carefully. They said they felt terrible for pressuring me. They said they hoped I could forgive them for believing lies about me. I told them it was okay. I said Zoe was good at manipulation. I said I understood why they believed her. Within 30 minutes, most people had left. The house felt empty and too quiet. Just our immediate family remained in the living room. Me, Zoe, Albert, and Valerie. Nobody wanted to start the conversation. Valerie kept looking between all of us. She suggested we all calm down first. She said we should discuss this rationally tomorrow when everyone had cooled off. I said no. I said we were addressing this now. I said I'd been waiting 3 months for someone to actually listen to what Zoe had been doing. I said I wasn't waiting another day. I started laying everything out in order. I went back to the beginning. I explained how the day I brought my car home, Zoe immediately decided it should be hers. I explained the parking blocking that went on for weeks. I explained how she told the whole family I'd promised to share the car when that never happened. I explained the social media campaign where she tagged me in posts about her unsafe car. I explained the fake medical condition she started claiming. I explained the insurance fraud attempt where she called pretending to be me. I explained the fake ID she used at the dealership trying to get duplicate keys. I explained the security cameras I had to install because I knew she was planning something. I explained the video footage of her putting sugar in my gas tank. I explained the fake medical documents she created for tonight. Albert's face changed with each thing I said. He went from shocked to more shocked to horrified. His hands started shaking. He kept looking at Zoe, but she wouldn't look back at him. Valerie tried to interrupt several times. She said maybe the parking thing was accidental. She said the social media was probably just Zoe venting her feelings. She said maybe the insurance thing was a misunderstanding. I cut her off. I asked her directly if she was going to excuse attempted vehicle destruction too. I asked if there was anything Zoe could do that Valerie wouldn't make excuses for. Albert's voice came out shaking. He told Valerie to stop making excuses. He said he'd stayed quiet for too long while she enabled Zoe's behavior. He said look where that got them. He said they had one daughter who committed fraud and vandalism against her own brother. He said that was on both of them, but especially on Valerie for refusing to ever hold Zoe accountable for anything. Zoe shoved her chair back so hard it scraped against the floor. She stood up and stared at everyone for a few seconds with her mouth open. Then she turned and walked out of the room fast. Her footsteps pounded down the hallway. The door to her old bedroom slammed so hard the picture frames on the wall rattled. One of them tilted sideways. Valerie stood up immediately and started moving toward the hallway. Albert reached out and put his hand on her arm. She stopped and looked at him. He shook his head and told her to let Zoe sit with what she'd done. Valerie opened her mouth like she was going to argue, but nothing came out. She sat back down slowly. Her hands were shaking. I took a deep breath and looked at both my parents. I told them I was going to the police station to file reports about everything. About Zoe putting sugar in my gas tank. About her trying to steal my identity to get car keys. About the insurance fraud. Valerie's face went white. She started shaking her head before I even finished talking. She said we couldn't involve the police in family problems. She said it would ruin Zoe's life. She said there had to be another way to handle this. I told her these weren't just family problems anymore. These were crimes. Serious crimes that could have destroyed my car and my credit and my whole life. I said I wasn't doing this to punish Zoe. I was doing it to protect myself. Albert surprised me by speaking up. His voice was quiet but steady. He said maybe real consequences were exactly what Zoe needed. He said family consequences had never worked. He looked at Valerie when he said it. He told her he'd been a coward for too long. He said he'd watched her enable Zoe's behavior for years, and he'd stayed quiet because it was easier. He said he was done watching his kids suffer because he was too scared to stand up to his wife. Valerie stared at him like he'd slapped her. Her eyes filled with tears. Valerie started crying. Not the fake crying Zoe did, but real crying where her whole face crumpled. She said she just wanted both her children to be happy. She said she didn't realize she was making things worse. Her voice broke on the last word. I felt bad watching her cry, but I also felt angry. I told her as gently as I could that giving Zoe everything she wanted wasn't making her happy. It was making her think she deserved whatever she wanted without working for it. It was making her manipulative and willing to hurt people to get her way. Valerie put her face in her hands and sobbed harder. Albert moved closer to her and put his arm around her shoulders, but he didn't argue with what I'd said. I left my parents' house around midnight. I drove home carefully even though my hands were shaking on the wheel. I kept thinking about Zoe's face when Nathan exposed her lies. I kept thinking about all those relatives staring at me with disgust before they knew the truth. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Zoe pouring sugar into my gas tank on that security footage. The next morning, I got up early and drove to the police station. The building was old brick with a parking lot that needed new pavement. I sat in my car for a few minutes trying to calm down. Then I went inside. The officer at the front desk asked how he could help. I told him I needed to file reports about vandalism and identity theft and fraud. He got me some forms and took me to a small room with a table and chairs. Another officer came in. He introduced himself and sat down across from me. He asked me to explain what happened. I started from the beginning. I told him about buying my car after 5 years of saving. I told him about Zoe deciding it should be hers. I told him about the parking blocking and the lies to family and the social media campaign. I told him about her calling my insurance company pretending to be me. I told him about the fake ID at the dealership. I told him about the security cameras I installed. Then I showed him the video of Zoe putting sugar in my gas tank. He watched it twice. He said it was excellent evidence. He said combined with the dealership incident, it showed a clear pattern. He said he was sorry my own sister had done this to me. He took detailed notes and had me fill out several forms. The whole process took almost 2 hours. After the police station, I drove straight to the mechanic. The shop was busy and loud with the sound of air tools and engines. I explained what happened to the guy at the counter. He got one of the mechanics to look at my car right away. The mechanic spent 20 minutes checking everything. Then he came back and confirmed that someone had definitely put sugar in the gas tank. He said I was lucky I caught it before starting the engine, or the damage would have been much worse. He said they'd need to drain the entire fuel system and flush everything out. He said it would cost $800. I felt sick hearing the number, but I told him to do it. He said it would take most of the day. I got all the paperwork and took pictures of everything for the police report. The mechanic said he'd write up a detailed explanation of the damage for my insurance claim. I went to a coffee shop to wait, and that's when my phone rang. The number looked familiar, but I couldn't place it. I answered and heard a woman's voice say my name. She said this was Lila from the dealership. It took me a second to remember her. She was the security person who'd caught Zoe with the fake ID. Lila said she'd heard about what happened at Thanksgiving through family connections. She said she wanted me to know she'd kept copies of everything from Zoe's fake ID attempt. She said it was such a clear case of fraud that she'd documented it carefully. She offered to provide official statements and documentation to support my police report. I thanked her probably 5 times. She said what Zoe did was serious, and she was glad to help make sure there were real consequences. While I was still at the coffee shop, my phone buzzed with a text from Nathan. He said he wanted to check in and make sure I was okay. He said he hoped exposing Zoe at dinner wasn't too harsh. I texted back right away thanking him. I told him he'd saved me from another hour of being treated like a terrible person by the whole family. I told him I'd been feeling crazy with everyone believing Zoe's lies over what I knew was true. He texted back that he'd noticed the pattern of her manipulation for years, but never felt like it was his place to say anything. He said watching her pull out fake medical documents was the final straw. We texted back and forth for a while. It felt good to talk to someone who actually understood what had been happening. That afternoon, my phone rang again. This time it was Zoe. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Her voice sounded completely different from usual. No fake crying, no victim act, just cold and angry. She said I'd ruined her life. She said I'd humiliated her in front of the entire family. She said no one would ever forgive me for being so cruel to her. She said I'd destroyed her reputation over a stupid car. Her voice got louder with each sentence. I could hear her breathing hard between words. I waited until she stopped talking. Then I told her she'd ruined her own life. I said she did that by lying and committing fraud and trying to destroy my property. I said I was done protecting her from what she'd chosen to do. I said she made every single decision that led to this moment, and now she had to live with it. She started to say something else, but I kept talking. I told her I'd filed police reports and I wasn't backing down. I told her actions have consequences, and she was about to learn that lesson the hard way. She hung up on me before I finished the sentence. The call ended with a click and then silence. I sat there staring at my phone for a long time after that. An hour after Zoe hung up on me, my phone rang again. The screen showed Mom's number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but answered on the 4th ring. Her voice came through shaky and rushed, talking before I could even say hello. She wanted me to drop the police report. She'd pay for everything herself. The mechanic bills, the security cameras, all of it. Just keep this in the family where it belonged. I listened to her talk for maybe 30 seconds before I cut in. I told her this stopped being a family matter when Zoe committed actual crimes. Multiple crimes. Insurance fraud. Identity theft. Property damage. I needed to protect myself legally because Zoe had shown she'd do anything to get what she wanted. Mom started crying. She said I was being cruel, that Zoe made mistakes, but she was still my sister. I told her Zoe's mistakes were felonies and hung up before she could guilt me into changing my mind. 20 minutes later, Dad called. His voice sounded different from usual, stronger somehow. He said he supported whatever I decided about the police report. No pressure either way. He'd been thinking a lot about how the family got so messed up, how we'd all learned to just give Zoe what she wanted to avoid her tantrums. He said he'd started looking into family therapy options. Real therapy with someone who specialized in family dynamics and enabling behaviors. He apologized for staying quiet all those years, while Mom made everything about managing Zoe's emotions. I didn't know what to say. Dad never talked like this, never admitted anything was wrong. I thanked him and told him I appreciated it. The call ended with him saying he loved me, and he was proud of how I'd handled everything. Over the next week, my phone became a constant stream of messages from relatives. Everyone had an opinion about what happened at Thanksgiving. My aunt on Dad's side sent 3 paragraphs about how she always knew Zoe was trouble, and she was glad someone finally stood up to her. My cousin from Mom's side said I was being too harsh, and Zoe clearly needed help, not punishment. Uncle Christian, who'd lectured me 2 weeks ago about helping my sick sister, sent a short text saying he was sorry for believing Zoe's lies. Another aunt suggested we were both wrong and should just apologize to each other and move on like adults. A cousin I barely knew sent a message saying family should forgive family no matter what. Someone else said Zoe deserved everything she got. The messages kept coming. Different opinions, different judgments, everyone thinking they knew the right answer. I stopped responding after the first day and just let them pile up unread. The detective assigned to my case called on Wednesday. He said the investigation was moving forward smoothly. He called it a straightforward property crime with excellent evidence. The security footage made everything clear. But what really elevated the seriousness was the identity theft attempt at the dealership. He said that showed premeditation. It proved Zoe had a pattern of behavior, not just one angry moment. He mentioned the fake medical documents, too. Said the district attorney was taking the case seriously because of how many different crimes were involved. He asked if I'd be willing to testify if it went to trial. I said yes without hesitating. Friday afternoon, I was at work when my phone started buzzing in my pocket. I ignored it through 2 meetings. When I finally checked, I had 4 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize and 1 voicemail. The voicemail was Zoe screaming, so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. She'd been served with papers about the investigation. She was yelling that I was trying to give her a criminal record over a stupid car, that I was ruining her entire life because I was petty and jealous. The message cut off mid-sentence when she ran out of time. She called back immediately. This time I answered. Her voice was raw from screaming. She said I was destroying her future, that no one would ever hire her with a record, that I was the worst person she'd ever known. I waited until she stopped to breathe. Then I told her calmly that actions have consequences. She chose to commit crimes instead of accepting that the car wasn't hers. She chose to lie to the family. She chose to try to destroy my property. Every single choice was hers. I wasn't doing this to her. She did it to herself. She called me a word I won't repeat and hung up. Saturday morning, someone knocked on my apartment door. I looked through the peephole and saw Mom standing in the hallway. She looked terrible. Her face was pale and she had dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. She looked older than I'd ever seen her. I opened the door and she asked if we could talk. She said she needed me to really think about what pressing charges would do to Zoe's future. Her job prospects, her whole life going forward. One mistake shouldn't ruin everything. I stepped back and let her come inside. We sat down at my kitchen table. The same table where I'd eaten dinner alone for 5 years while I saved every penny for my car. Mom folded her hands on the table and looked at me with wet eyes. I took a deep breath and told her this wasn't one mistake. It was months of manipulation and lies and crimes. But more than that, I told her I'd felt invisible in this family for years. Everything always revolved around managing Zoe's emotions, giving Zoe what she wanted, making sure Zoe didn't have a meltdown. I worked 3 jobs. I saved for 5 years. I sacrificed everything for something that mattered to me. And the second I got it, Zoe decided it should be hers. And Mom agreed with her, like always. I said I wasn't willing to sacrifice myself anymore to protect Zoe from herself. Mom started crying for real then. Not the quiet tears from before, but actual sobs that shook her shoulders. She said she knew she'd enabled Zoe. She knew it. But she didn't know how to stop once the pattern started. Every time she tried to set boundaries, Zoe's meltdowns were so extreme that giving in seemed easier, less painful, less exhausting. She said she'd created a monster and she didn't know how to fix it. She looked at me across the table and said she was sorry. Sorry for making me invisible. Sorry for always choosing Zoe. Sorry for not protecting me the way a mother should. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. I told her I appreciated her honesty. I really did. But I was still moving forward with the legal process. This wasn't about punishment. This was about Zoe finally facing real consequences for the first time in her life. Maybe that was the best thing Mom could do for her now. Let her face what she'd done instead of protecting her from it. Mom nodded slowly and wiped her eyes with her sleeve. She didn't argue. She just sat there looking defeated and sad. The detective called again on Monday. He had news about a plea deal. The district attorney reviewed all the evidence and was willing to offer Zoe an arrangement. She'd plead guilty to misdemeanor vandalism. In exchange, she'd pay full restitution for the damages. She'd get probation instead of jail time, community service hours, mandatory counseling. The identity theft charges would be dropped completely if she complied with everything. He said it was a fair deal considering the evidence against her. He asked what I thought. I told him it sounded fair to me. I never wanted to destroy Zoe's life. I just wanted her to face consequences and understand that what she did was wrong. He said he'd present the offer to Zoe's public defender, and we'd see what happened next. I told the detective that sounded fair to me. My goal was never to destroy Zoe's life. I just wanted her to face consequences and understand that what she did was wrong. He said he'd present the offer to Zoe's public defender, and we'd see what happened next. 2 days later, the detective called back. Zoe refused the deal. She was insisting she was innocent and that I'd somehow framed her. He sounded tired when he told me. Her public defender was apparently trying to explain reality to her, but she wasn't listening. I asked what happened next if she wouldn't take the deal. He said they'd move forward with the trial, and with the evidence they had, she'd probably face harsher penalties than what the plea offered. The next afternoon, the detective called again. Zoe's public defender had shown her the security footage in detail, made her watch herself pouring sugar into my gas tank from 3 different camera angles, showed her the dealership documentation about the fake ID attempt, walked her through exactly what a jury would see and how bad it would look, explained that going to trial with this kind of evidence meant she could face actual jail time instead of just probation. 3 days after that, Valerie called me. Her voice sounded heavy and sad at the same time. Zoe accepted the plea deal. Valerie thanked me for not pushing for the maximum penalties, even though I had every right to. She said she knew I could have made things much worse for Zoe, but I chose not to. I told her I just wanted this to be over and for Zoe to get help. The court paperwork came through the following week. As part of the restitution, Zoe had to pay me back for the mechanic costs and the security camera system I installed. $800 for the fuel system flush and another $400 for the cameras. The payment plan was set up through the court system. I'd receive monthly payments for the next year, $100 every month for 12 months. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the principle that she had to actively make amends for what she did. A week later, Albert called and asked if I wanted to meet him for lunch. We met at a diner halfway between his house and my apartment. He looked older than I remembered, more tired. He told me he'd moved into the guest room. He and Valerie were doing intensive couples counseling. They needed to figure out how they got to a place where one child felt entitled to destroy the other's property, and they nearly enabled it to happen. He said the therapist was making them look at years of patterns they'd ignored, how they'd trained themselves to give Zoe whatever she wanted to avoid her meltdowns, how they'd made me invisible in the process. He apologized for staying quiet all those years, said he was done being a coward. The first restitution payment arrived exactly on schedule. $100 deposited into my account through the court system, then another one the next month, and another. They came like clockwork. It wasn't about the money. It was about Zoe having to actively acknowledge what she did every single month, having to make that payment and remember why. Nathan and I started meeting for coffee every few weeks. We'd never been particularly close before Thanksgiving, but something changed after he spoke up. He told me he was glad he said something, even though it was awkward. Watching Zoe manipulate the family for months had been making him feel like he was part of the problem by staying quiet. He said he'd seen her pull similar stuff at other family events over the years, but always figured it wasn't his place to say anything. Now he wished he'd spoken up sooner. 3 months after Thanksgiving, Valerie called me. Her voice sounded different, cautiously hopeful in a way I hadn't heard before. She said Zoe had been going to her court-mandated counseling sessions. The therapist was apparently helping her understand how her behavior patterns developed, how she'd learned to manipulate emotions to get what she wanted, how the family enabling had made it worse. Valerie said the therapist told her that Zoe was actually engaging with the work instead of just going through the motions. She sounded like she wanted to believe Zoe might actually be changing. I ran into Zoe at the grocery store completely by accident. I was grabbing milk from the dairy section and turned around, and there she was. Our first face-to-face encounter since Thanksgiving. She looked uncomfortable, but she didn't run away. We both froze for a second. Then she shifted her weight from one foot to the other and stared at the floor. After what felt like forever, she mumbled that her therapist said she should apologize to me. Her apology was stilted and clearly something she'd been coached to say. She talked about taking accountability and recognizing harmful patterns. It sounded rehearsed. But then she looked up at me, and there was something genuine in her eyes when she admitted she was jealous of how hard I worked for things, while she expected everything to be handed to her. She said watching me save for 5 years made her feel bad about herself, so instead of dealing with that feeling, she decided I didn't deserve what I'd earned. I thanked her for the apology, told her I hoped the counseling helped her. She nodded and walked away quickly like she was afraid I'd say more. I stood there holding my milk carton and watching her leave. Something had shifted, not fixed, not resolved, just shifted slightly towards something that might eventually look like better. Albert called me a few weeks after the grocery store encounter. His voice sounded different on the phone, more confident than I'd heard in years. He wanted to meet for lunch to update me on how things were going with Valerie and Zoe. We met at a diner halfway between our places, and he looked better too, less tired around the eyes. He told me that therapy was actually working for him and Valerie. They'd been going twice a week for 3 months now. The therapist had them working on identifying when Zoe was using manipulation tactics and implementing real consequences instead of just giving in to avoid conflict. He said it was incredibly hard because Zoe fought them on everything. She'd cry, she'd rage, she'd try every trick that had worked for years. But they were holding firm for the first time. When Zoe demanded money for something she didn't need, Valerie actually said no. When Zoe threw a fit about it, they let her be upset instead of rushing to fix her feelings. Albert said he felt like he was learning to be a parent all over again, but this time doing it right. He admitted he'd been taking the easy way out for decades, letting Valerie handle everything and staying quiet to keep the peace. Now he was speaking up when he disagreed, setting his own boundaries with Zoe, being an actual partner in the parenting process even though Zoe was an adult. The changes were small, but they were real. He thanked me for standing my ground about the car situation, because watching me refuse to back down had shown him it was possible to say no to Zoe and survive her reaction. 6 months after Thanksgiving, my phone rang with Albert's number again. He was calling to invite me to a family barbecue at their house the following weekend. My first instinct was to make an excuse and decline. The thought of being in the same space as Zoe again made my stomach tight. But Albert's voice was gentle and persistent. He said the family needed to start healing and moving forward. He promised he would shut down any drama immediately if Zoe tried anything. He said he understood if I wasn't ready, but he really hoped I'd consider coming. Valerie got on the phone too and added that she missed me and wanted to see me. Her voice cracked a little when she said it. I sat there holding my phone, staring at my calendar, trying to decide if I was ready for this. Part of me wanted to stay away from all of them forever, to protect myself from more manipulation and disappointment. But another part of me remembered that these were still my parents, still my family despite everything that had happened. I told Albert I'd think about it and let him know in a couple days. I spent those days weighing the decision, talking it over with Nathan, who encouraged me to go, imagining different scenarios of how it might play out. Finally, I texted Albert that I'd come, but I was leaving the second things got weird. He responded immediately with a grateful message and a promise that things would be different this time. The barbecue was exactly as awkward as I'd expected when I first arrived. I parked on the street instead of in the driveway, keeping my exit route clear just in case. The backyard was full of relatives I hadn't seen since Thanksgiving. Everyone went quiet for a second when I walked through the gate. Then people started greeting me with careful smiles and overly cheerful hellos that felt forced. Zoe was standing near the grill with a plate of food, and when she saw me, she immediately moved to the other side of the yard. I grabbed a drink from the cooler and positioned myself near the fence, watching her watch me from across the lawn. Other relatives kept glancing between us nervously like they were waiting for an explosion. The whole thing felt like being in a room full of people holding their breath. Nathan showed up about 20 minutes after me and made a beeline straight for where I was standing. He started talking loudly about his hospital implementing new patient privacy protocols after some recent issues with people trying to access records they shouldn't have access to. He said it with this pointed look toward where Zoe was standing. Several people who understood the reference started laughing, and the tension in the yard broke a little bit. Someone made a joke about HIPAA violations, and everyone laughed harder. Even Albert cracked a smile from where he was flipping burgers. Zoe's face went red, but she didn't say anything, just stared down at her plate. Nathan caught my eye and winked. The rest of the afternoon became gradually less uncomfortable as people relaxed and started having normal conversations. Later in the afternoon, I was digging through the cooler trying to find a specific type of soda when Zoe appeared next to me. I hadn't seen her approach and my whole body tensed up automatically. She reached past me for a water bottle without saying anything at first. We both stood there awkwardly, half bent over the cooler, not looking at each other. Then she cleared her throat and said her therapist had her working on taking accountability for her actions. Her voice was quiet and shaky. She said she wanted me to know that she understood now that what she did was really messed up. She talked about how her therapist helped her see that her behavior came from a place of deep entitlement, from growing up believing she deserved whatever she wanted just because she wanted it. She said she'd spent her whole life manipulating people's emotions to get things, and she never realized how damaging that was until she got caught and had to face consequences. She wasn't crying or trying to make me feel bad for her. She was just talking, looking at the ice in the cooler instead of at me. She said she knew I probably didn't forgive her, and she understood why. She just wanted me to know she was working on being different. I stood up and closed the cooler lid, looked at her for the first time since she'd started talking. Her face looked different somehow, less smooth and confident, more uncertain. I told her I appreciated her saying that to me. I said I could see she was putting in effort to change, and that mattered. I didn't tell her we were suddenly going to be close again, or that everything was fine now, because neither of those things were true. But I acknowledged that she was trying, and that was more than she'd ever done before. She nodded and walked away quickly, clutching her water bottle. I watched her go and felt something shift slightly inside my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, not trust, just a small opening where before there had only been anger and hurt. Before I left the barbecue, Valerie caught me near the back door. She asked if she could talk to me for a minute privately. We stepped into the kitchen where it was quieter. She thanked me for coming today, said it meant a lot to her and to Albert that I was willing to give the family another chance. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying, just emotional. She told me she knew she had a long way to go in changing her parenting patterns. She said her therapist had helped her understand that she'd been so focused on avoiding Zoe's negative emotions that she'd completely ignored how her enabling was affecting me and teaching Zoe terrible lessons about how the world works. She said she was grateful I didn't give up on the family entirely, even when it would have been completely justified. She reached out like she wanted to hug me, then stopped herself and just squeezed my arm instead. I told her I appreciated her working on things. I didn't make any promises about how our relationship would be going forward, but I didn't shut the door completely either. She seemed to understand that was the best I could offer right now. When I left, Albert walked me to my car and told me he was proud of me for coming. I drove home feeling emotionally exhausted, but also somehow lighter than I'd felt in months. Family gatherings over the next several months became gradually less tense as everyone adjusted to the new patterns. Zoe was noticeably different at each event, quieter, less demanding. She didn't try to be the center of attention anymore. She'd sit and listen to conversations instead of dominating them. She'd help clean up without being asked. Small things, but noticeable to everyone who remembered how she used to be. Valerie shocked everyone the first time she told Zoe no about something in front of other people. Zoe had asked if Valerie could drive her somewhere, and Valerie said she couldn't because she had other plans. Zoe started to push, and Valerie just repeated that she wasn't available. Zoe looked stunned, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. But she dropped it and found another way to get where she needed to go. The second time it happened, people were less shocked. By the fifth or sixth time, it started feeling almost normal. Albert was different too. He spoke up during family discussions. He made decisions without checking with Valerie first. He set boundaries with extended family members who tried to get involved in their business. The whole family dynamic was shifting slowly, like a house settling into new foundations. Albert and I started having lunch together every few weeks, just the two of us. During one of these lunches, he told me privately that he was proud of how I'd handled everything with Zoe in the car. He said watching me set firm boundaries and refuse to back down had taught him that he needed to do the same thing in his own life. He'd spent years being passive and avoiding conflict, and it had nearly destroyed his family. Now he was learning to stand up for what he believed in, to support Valerie in making hard parenting choices, to be honest, even when it was uncomfortable. He said his marriage with Valerie was stronger now than it had been in years because they were finally addressing problems instead of avoiding them. They were working as a team, instead of Valerie making all the decisions while he stayed silent. He thanked me for being strong enough to stand my ground even when the whole family was against me, because my example had given him permission to find his own strength. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just told him I was glad things were getting better for them. But inside I felt something warm, like maybe all the pain and conflict had actually led to something good after all. A full year after the Thanksgiving disaster, I got a notification from the court system that Zoe had successfully completed her probation. She'd made every single restitution payment on time. She'd finished all her required community service hours. Her probation officer's report noted that she'd attended every counseling session, and her therapist reported genuine progress in addressing her entitlement issues and manipulation patterns. The case was officially closed. I sat in my apartment reading the notification on my laptop and felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that it was over. Satisfaction that she'd followed through with everything. Cautious hope that maybe she really had changed. I forwarded the notification to Albert, and he called me within minutes. He said he was proud of Zoe for completing everything successfully, but he was also proud of me for holding her accountable in the first place. He said if I hadn't pressed charges and forced real consequences, Zoe would probably still be the same manipulative person she'd been before. Sometimes the hardest thing and the right thing were the same thing. I agreed with him, and we talked for a while about how different everything was now compared to a year ago. When we hung up, I felt like maybe we'd all survived something terrible and come out different on the other side. Not perfect, not healed completely, but different in ways that mattered. I still drove my sports car every single day and loved it just as much as the day I bought it. Maybe even more now because of everything it represented. Every time I got behind the wheel and felt the engine start, I remembered the 5 years of work I'd put in to earn it. The overtime shifts, the skipped vacations, the careful budgeting and saving. Every time I drove it, I felt proud of myself for working that hard for something I wanted, and I felt relieved that I'd stood up for myself when it mattered most, when my entire family was pressuring me to give it up. The car was beautiful and fast and fun to drive, but it meant more to me than just transportation. It was proof that I could set a goal and achieve it through hard work. It was proof that I could stand up to manipulation and pressure, It was proof that I deserved good things and didn't have to apologize for earning them. Some days when I was driving, I'd think about how close I came to giving in to Zoe's demands just to make the family conflict stop. How much easier it would have been to just switch cars and let her have what she wanted, but I didn't. And now I had something I'd earned through my own effort, and Zoe was learning to earn things for herself too, and our whole family was healthier because I'd refused to enable her anymore. A few weeks after Zoe finished her probation, Nathan texted me about planning a weekend road trip. He suggested we take my car since his SUV was having transmission problems, and he wanted an excuse to ride in something fun for once. I agreed immediately because driving with Nathan was always easy and comfortable compared to the tension that used to exist around my car. We met at a coffee shop on Saturday morning to map out our route and decide where we wanted to stop along the coast. Nathan joked that it was nice to drive with someone who appreciated that I'd earned the car through 5 years of hard work rather than someone who thought they deserved it just because they wanted it. I laughed and told him the family drama had at least resulted in us becoming genuinely close friends instead of just cousins who saw each other at holidays. We planned to leave the following weekend and drive north along the coast with no real agenda except good music and better company. The whole conversation felt light and normal in a way that family interactions hadn't felt in years. 2 days later, Albert called to tell me something surprising about Zoe. She'd finally traded in her 15-year-old disaster of a car for a modest used sedan that she'd saved up for herself over the past several months. Albert said she'd been working extra shifts at her job and actually budgeting carefully to afford the down payment and monthly payments. He told me she seemed genuinely proud when she drove it home, showing him all the features and explaining how she'd researched different models to find the best value. Albert's voice got a little emotional when he said he thought maybe Zoe was starting to understand what I'd felt like when I bought my sports car after years of saving. He said watching her work hard for something and feel proud of earning it made him realize how much damage had been done by always giving her whatever she wanted without making her work for anything. I told Albert I was glad Zoe was learning that lesson, even if it took longer than anyone hoped. The next family gathering happened 3 weeks later at my parents' house for Albert's birthday. I arrived expecting the usual awkwardness, but found the atmosphere surprisingly relaxed. Zoe was already there when I pulled up, and she actually walked over to look at my car as I was getting out. She stood there for a moment just looking at it before she told me it really was a nice car. Her voice was quiet but sincere when she said she understood now why I hadn't wanted to trade, and that she was working on being less jealous of other people's success. She admitted her therapist had helped her see that her jealousy came from never having to work hard for anything, so she didn't value what she had. I thanked her for saying that and told her I was proud of her for buying her own car with money she'd earned. It wasn't a perfect relationship between us and probably never would be, but it felt honest for the first time in years. We walked into the house together, and the rest of the family seemed to relax when they saw us talking normally. Driving home that night, I thought about everything that had happened over the past year and a half. I'd learned that protecting yourself from family manipulation wasn't selfish, but actually necessary for everyone's health. My relationship with my parents were better now that real boundaries existed, instead of just enabling whatever Zoe wanted. Zoe was actually working on herself with her therapist and learning to earn things instead of demanding them. I still had my dream car that represented 5 years of hard work and sacrifice, and I loved it just as much as the day I brought it home. Things weren't perfect in my family, and probably never would be completely fixed, but they were real now instead of fake peace built on me giving up what I'd earned. That felt like enough.